The morning sun had barely crested the eastern hills when Tabitha Jenkins loaded the last of her belongings onto the weathered stagecoach. Her black morning dress, already gathering the fine dust that perpetually hung in the air of Newton, Kansas. A dress she had worn for precisely 3 months since they buried her husband in the hard prairie soil. She stood on the wooden sidewalk outside the general store, one gloved hand resting on the coach door, the other clutching a small leather valise that contained everything of value she still owned. The year was 1878, and Newton had grown from its violent cattle town origins into something resembling civilization, though the railroad tracks still divided the respectable side of town from the rougher establishments that catered to the drovers and drifters passing through. Tabitha had lived here for 2 years with her husband Daniel, a freight operator who had promised her a good life on the Kansas plains. Instead, he had left her with debts she could not pay, and a future that looked as barren as the winter wheat fields surrounding the town. "You do not have to go, Mrs. Jenkins," said Martha Whitley, the shopkeeper's wife, standing beside her with genuine concern etched across her weathered face. "There are people here who would help you. You have friends." Tabitha shook her head, her auburn hair pinned tightly beneath a simple black bonnet. At 24 years old, she felt ancient, worn down by circumstances beyond her control. "The bank has already taken the house. I have a cousin in Denver who has offered me work in her dress shop." "It is not charity, Martha. It is a fresh start." "But Denver is so far," Martha protested, though they both knew the argument was futile. The decision had been made weeks ago when the foreclosure notice arrived. "Distance is precisely what I need," Tabitha said softly, then embraced the older woman. "Thank you for your kindness. I will never forget it." She climbed into the coach before her resolve could weaken. 2 other passengers were already inside, a stern-faced traveling salesman and an elderly woman who immediately closed her eyes as if the morning light offended her. Tabitha settled into her seat, arranging her skirts, trying not to think about everything she was leaving behind. Not just the town, but the grave in the cemetery on the hill where wildflowers grew in summer. She had said her goodbyes there at dawn, placing a sprig of dried lavender on the simple wooden marker. The driver climbed up to his seat, and Tabitha heard the reins snap. The coach lurched forward, wheels creaking, and Newton began to slide past her window. The mercantile, the church with its white steeple, the saloon that Daniel had frequented too often, the blacksmith shop where smoke already rose from the morning's first fire. Each building held a memory, and she forced herself to look away, to focus instead on the future, uncertain as it was. They had barely reached the edge of town when Tabitha heard it, the thunder of hooves approaching fast from behind. Her fellow passengers stirred, the salesman leaning to peer out his window with curiosity turning quickly to concern. "Someone is riding hard," he said, "coming right for us." Tabitha felt her heart quicken. Bandits were not unheard of on these roads, though it seemed bold to attack a coach practically within sight of town. She gripped her valise tighter, thinking of the small amount of money sewn into the lining, everything she had left in the world. The driver called out, and the coach began to slow. The hoofbeats grew louder, then a single rider swept past Tabitha's window, a blur of brown horse and worn leather, circling around to block the road ahead. The coach came to a complete stop, rocking on its springs. "What is the meaning of this?" the salesman demanded, his face reddening with indignation. Tabitha knew before she looked. Something in her chest had already recognized the rhythm of those hoofbeats, the particular way the rider sat his horse. She leaned forward to see out the opposite window, and there he was. Russell Norton sat astride his bay gelding in the middle of the dusty road. his hat pushed back to reveal sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling beneath a faded blue shirt, and when his gaze found hers through the coach window, something passed between them that made her breath catch in her throat. "Mrs. Jenkins," he called out, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "I need to speak with you. You know this man?" the salesman asked Tabitha, suspicion heavy in his tone. She did. Russell Norton had worked for her husband, helping with the freight wagons, one of the few men Daniel had trusted completely. He was 30 years old, quiet and capable, the kind of man who spoke more through his actions than his words. Since Daniel's death, Russell had tried to help. He had brought firewood when winter set in, repaired her front step without being asked, appeared at church socials with offers to fetch her punch or escort her home when darkness fell. Tabitha had accepted these kindnesses while maintaining proper distance, a widow observing her mourning period, a woman who could not afford speculation or scandal. "He worked for my husband," she said carefully. "He is a good man. Then why is he stopping the coach like a common road agent?" The salesman muttered. The driver had climbed down and was speaking to Russell in low tones. Tabitha could not hear the words, but she saw Russell shake his head firmly, saw him dismount and approach the coach door. Her pulse hammered in her ears. He opened the door himself, standing in the bright sunlight, dust motes swirling around him. Up close, she could see the stubble on his jaw, the lines around his eyes from squinting into the sun, the determination in his expression. "Mrs. Jenkins, Tabitha," he said, and the use of her given name felt both improper and intimate. "Please step out here and talk to me, just for a moment." "Sir, this is highly irregular," the salesman began, but Tabitha was already gathering her skirts, already moving toward the door. "It is all right," she said quietly. "Please excuse me." Russell offered his hand to help her down, and when her gloved fingers touched his palm, even through the fabric she felt the warmth, the strength. Her feet found the ground, and they stood facing each other in the road while the driver and passengers watched with varying degrees of curiosity and disapproval. "You should not have come," Tabitha said, though her voice lacked conviction. "The coach has a schedule." "I will pay the driver for the delay," Russell said. "I will pay your fare back to town if necessary. Tabitha, you cannot leave." She had not heard anyone speak her name with such intensity in months, perhaps years. Daniel had called her wife more often than her name, as if their marriage had subsumed her identity. Now, hearing it from Russell's lips, she felt something inside her crack open, some carefully maintained defense beginning to crumble. "I have no choice," she said, forcing herself to be practical, to be sensible. "There is nothing left for me here. No home, no means of support. My cousin has offered me a position and a place to live. It would be foolish to refuse." "Then be foolish," Russell said, and she saw him struggle with the words, with putting into speech something he had perhaps never articulated before. "Stay, not for what was, but for what could be." "Russell, I am in mourning," she protested, though even as she said it, she knew it for the excuse it was. "People would talk, it would not be proper." "Proper," he repeated, and something like frustration crossed his face. "Tabitha, I have been proper, I have been patient. I have waited and kept my distance and done everything society says I should do. But watching you climb into that coach, knowing you were leaving forever, made me realize that sometimes propriety matters less than truth." "What truth?" she whispered, though she knew, had known perhaps for weeks now, had felt it in every careful conversation, every moment their eyes met across a room. Russell glanced back at the coach, at their audience, and she saw him make a decision. He took her elbow gently and guided her a few steps away, giving them the smallest measure of privacy in the middle of the open road. "The truth is I have loved you since the first day your husband brought you to Newton," Russell said, his voice low and urgent. "I saw you step down from the train in your green traveling dress, looking around at this dusty cattle town like you were trying to find something beautiful in it, and I thought Daniel Jenkins was the luckiest man alive. I worked for him faithfully, and I never once crossed a line. But after he died, after a decent time had passed, I started to hope. I started to think maybe you felt something too, in the way you smiled when I brought you firewood, in the way you did not send me away when I found excuses to check on you." Tabitha felt tears prick her eyes. "Russell, even if what you say is true, even if I have feelings that would be inappropriate to name, there are practical matters. I have no home, I have debts. What kind of future could we possibly have?" "My future," Russell said firmly. "I own 160 acres 5 miles south of here. I filed my homestead claim 3 years ago, proved it up properly. I have a house, not fancy but solid, built it myself. I have cattle, a good herd started. I have been building something, Tabitha, and I did not fully realize until this morning that I was building it for you. Stay and be my wife. Let me take care of you, not as charity but as a partner. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." The world seemed to narrow to just the two of them, standing in the Kansas dust with the morning sun climbing higher. Tabitha's mind raced with objections, with all the reasons this was impossible, impractical, improper. But her heart, her treacherous heart that she had kept locked away since Daniel's death, was pounding with something she had not felt in so long she almost did not recognize it at first. Hope. "People will say I did not mourn long enough," she said weakly. "People always talk," Russell countered. "They talked when Daniel drank too much at the saloon. They talked when the bank foreclosed on your house. They will talk no matter what you do. The question is, do you want to spend your life caring what they say, or do you want to spend it building something real?" "I barely know you," she tried, though it felt like a lie even as she said it. "You know I am steady. You know I work hard. You know I have never lied to you or made a promise I did not keep. And you know," he stepped closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his green eyes, "that when I look at you, something inside you responds. I see it, Tabitha. I see it right now in your face." She did not deny it, could not. "If I stay," she said slowly, "and agree to court you properly, where would I live? The bank has taken the house, and I cannot stay at the hotel indefinitely." "Martha and her husband have already offered," Russell said, and Tabitha realized he had been planning this, had thought through the practicalities. "I spoke to them this morning before I rode after you. Martha said you could stay in their spare room, help in the store for your keep until we married. A proper courtship if that is what you need, though I would marry you today if you would have me." "Today," Tabitha repeated, feeling dizzy. "Russell, we cannot possibly." "Why not?" he asked simply. "I know my own mind, Tabitha. I have known it for months. If you need time to be sure of yours, I will give it to you. But at least stay and give us a chance. Do not climb back into that coach and disappear to Denver and leave me wondering for the rest of my life what might have been." Tabitha looked past him at the stagecoach, at the driver who was watching with his arms crossed, at the faces in the windows. Then she looked at Russell, really looked at him, this man who had ridden after her, who had stopped a moving coach and laid his heart bare in the middle of a public road. Daniel had courted her in Virginia with pretty words and promises of adventure, and she had followed him west into a marriage that had been more loneliness than love. She had learned hard lessons about choosing security over substance, about confusing a man's charm with his character. But Russell was not charming. He was honest, direct, almost blunt in his sincerity. And there was something profoundly attractive in that, in knowing exactly where she stood, in seeing clearly what he offered. No games, no pretense, just a man and a future he wanted to build with her. "If I stay," she said, and saw hope flare bright in his eyes, "I need time. Not months, perhaps, but weeks at least. I need to know that I am making this decision for the right reasons, not just out of fear or convenience." "Whatever time you need," Russell said immediately. "Court you properly, let people see us together, give them time to adjust to the idea. I will do it right, Tabitha, I promise you that." She took a deep breath, feeling as if she stood on the edge of something vast and unknown. Then she turned toward the coach. "Driver, please remove my belongings. I will be staying in Newton after all." The driver blinked in surprise, then shrugged and climbed up to the luggage rack. The salesman leaned out the window. "Madam, are you certain? This seems rather impulsive." "Perhaps," Tabitha agreed, watching as Russell moved to help the driver with her trunk. "But I have tried being cautious and sensible, and it left me alone and destitute. Perhaps it is time to try something different." Within minutes, her trunk and bags were stacked by the side of the road. The stagecoach rolled away in a cloud of dust, heading west without her, and Tabitha felt an unexpected lightness, as if she had set down a burden she had been carrying without realizing its weight. Russell stood beside her belongings, holding his horse's reins. "I will load these onto my wagon and bring them to Martha's. But first, would you let me take you to breakfast? The restaurant by the station makes decent flapjacks, and I think we have a lot to talk about." Tabitha smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in months. "That sounds lovely." He offered his arm, formal and proper despite the decidedly improper way he had stopped the coach. She took it, and they walked back into Newton together, leading his horse, her hand resting in the crook of his elbow. People would talk, certainly. Widow Jenkins and the cowboy who worked for her husband, taking breakfast together mere months after Daniel's death. But as they walked, Tabitha found she did not care nearly as much as she thought she would. The restaurant was nearly empty at this hour, just a few railroad workers finishing their morning coffee before their shifts. Russell held out a chair for Tabitha, then sat across from her, removing his hat and setting it on the chair beside him. When the waitress came, a young woman named Sally who had always been kind to Tabitha, she raised an eyebrow at seeing them together but said nothing judgmental. "Coffee for you both?" Sally asked. "Please," Tabitha said. "And I will have the flapjacks Russell mentioned." "Same for me," Russell added. "And some of those eggs if you have them." When Sally left, silence fell between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Russell looked at his hands, calloused and strong, then up at Tabitha. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that Daniel was a good man in many ways. I worked for him for over a year, and he treated me fairly, paid me what he promised. I do not mean to disrespect his memory." Tabitha appreciated the consideration, but she also felt the need for honesty. "Daniel had good qualities," she said slowly, "but our marriage was not what I hoped it would be. He drank more than he should have. He made business decisions without consulting me, decisions that led to the debts that buried us. And he was often absent, even when he was home." She paused, then added softly, "I mourned his death because death deserves mourning and because of what we might have been. But I cannot pretend to a grief I do not fully feel." Russell nodded, his expression somber. "I am sorry it was like that for you. You deserved better." "Perhaps I will have better now," she said, meeting his eyes. "But Russell, I need to know more about you, about what you want from life. You spoke of your homestead, your cattle. What are your plans? What kind of life are you offering?" He leaned forward, warming to the subject. "The land is good, fertile soil and decent water from a creek that runs year-round. I have been building slowly, carefully. I have about 50 head of cattle now, and I want to expand that to 200 within 3 years. I am not trying to be a cattle baron, just a man making a steady living from the land. The house is small, 3 rooms right now, but I designed it so I could add on as needed. A proper parlor, more bedrooms." He paused, color rising slightly in his face. "A family if God wills it." "Children," Tabitha said, and felt something complicated move through her. She had wanted children with Daniel, but as the months passed and none came, she had started to wonder if she was barren. "I may not be able to give you children." "Then we will love each other," Russell said simply. "Children are a blessing, but they are not the only measure of a marriage. My parents had 7, and they spent so much time just surviving they barely knew each other as people. I would rather have you and no children than children with someone I did not truly love." The coffee arrived, and Tabitha wrapped her hands around the warm cup, letting Russell's words settle into her. He was offering her not just security but partnership, not just a home but genuine affection. It felt almost too good to be true, and she found herself looking for the flaw, the catch, the thing that would make this another mistake. "What do you like to do when you are not working?" she asked. "What brings you joy?" Russell seemed surprised by the question, as if no one had asked him such a thing before. "I like to read," he said after a moment. "Surprised? I know I do not seem the type, but my mother taught school back in Missouri before she married, and she made sure all of us could read well. I have about 20 books at my house, everything from agricultural manuals to poetry. And I like to build things with my hands, not just the necessary work but small projects. I have been carving a chess set from walnut wood, nearly finished with it." "I used to play chess with my father," Tabitha said, delighted, "before he died back in Virginia." "Then we will finish the set together and play," Russell said, his face brightening. "What about you? What brings you joy?" She had to think about it. The last 2 years had been so consumed with just getting through each day that joy had seemed like a luxury she could not afford. "I like to sew," she said finally. "Not just mending, but creating things. I made my wedding dress and several of the dresses I brought west. I like choosing fabrics, imagining how they will look when finished. And I like to garden, though there was not much opportunity in town. Daniel's house had only a small yard. My homestead has space for a garden as large as you want," Russell said. "I have been meaning to fence off an area near the house for vegetables. The soil is good there, protected from the worst of the wind." Their breakfast arrived, and they ate while continuing to talk, the conversation flowing more easily now. Russell told her about his family back in Missouri. Parents and siblings he had left behind when he decided to try his fortune in Kansas. Tabitha told him about her childhood in Virginia, about her father who had been a schoolteacher and her mother who had died when Tabitha was 12, leaving her to keep house for her father until his death 6 years later. "That is when Daniel came along," she said. "I was working as a seamstress, living in a boarding house, and he was in Virginia on business. He swept me up with talk of the West, of opportunities and adventures. I was 21 and lonely and wanted to believe in something." "And now you are 24 and wiser," Russell said gently. "Am I?" she asked. "I am sitting in a restaurant with a man who is proposing marriage after stopping my stagecoach like an outlaw. Some would say I have learned nothing about caution." Russell smiled, a real smile that transformed his serious face. "The difference is, this time you are choosing with your eyes open. You know what you are getting. A simple rancher with a decent piece of land and strong feelings for you. No grand promises, no talk of getting rich or building an empire. Just an honest life with an honest man." "You make it sound easy," Tabitha said. "It will not be easy," Russell corrected. "Ranching is hard work, the weather is unpredictable, and we will have lean years along with good ones. But we will face it together, and that makes all the difference. After breakfast, Russell hitched his wagon and loaded Tabitha's belongings, then drove her to the Whitley house. Martha was sweeping her front porch when they arrived, and her eyes widened in surprise. "Mrs. Jenkins, you are back." "Thanks to Mr. Norton," Tabitha said, climbing down from the wagon seat with Russell's assistance. "He made a rather convincing argument for staying." Martha's eyes darted between them, understanding dawning. "I see. Well, that is wonderful news, and you know my offer stands, dear. You are welcome to the spare room for as long as you need it." "I spoke to Martha this morning," Russell said, addressing Tabitha. "Explained the situation, asked if she would be willing to help. You were quite confident I would agree to stay," Tabitha observed. "No," Russell said honestly, "but I was desperate enough to hope." With Russell's help, they moved Tabitha's trunk and bags into the small room at the back of the Whitley house. It was simple but clean, with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the back garden. Martha left them alone for a moment, and in the quiet of the room, reality settled around Tabitha. She had refused a certain future in Denver for an uncertain one here. She had trusted a man she barely knew beyond his actions, his steady presence on the edges of her life. "Are you having second thoughts?" Russell asked, watching her face. "Many thoughts," Tabitha admitted, "but not regrets, not yet. Is that enough?" "It is more than enough," Russell said. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. Without the glove between them now, his palm was warm and rough against hers. "We will do this right, Tabitha. I will court you properly. Dinners, walks, church on Sundays. Let people see us together, let them adjust. And when you are ready, when you are absolutely certain, we will marry. No rushing, no pressure." "How long did you wait after your first wife died?" Tabitha asked, then stopped. "I am sorry, I should not assume. Were you married before?" "No," Russell said. "Came close once, a girl back in Missouri. But her father did not approve of a younger son with no prospects, and she chose someone else. That was part of why I came west, to build something of my own. And now I am grateful it happened that way, because it meant I was free when you came into my life." Tabitha nodded slowly. "We should establish some rules for this courtship. I want to help Martha in the store, earn my keep properly. I want to attend church and social functions. I want people to see that this is respectable, that we are doing things correctly." "Agreed," Russell said. "And I want to show you my homestead, let you see what would be your home. But we will take someone with us, a chaperone, keep it proper." "Martha would probably agree to that," Tabitha said. They made plans for Russell to call on her the following evening, to take her to supper at the restaurant again where people could see them. He would attend church with her on Sunday, sitting in the pew beside her, making his intentions clear to the whole congregation. Small steps, building toward something larger. Before Russell left, he paused in the doorway. "Thank you," he said simply, "for staying, for giving us a chance." "Thank you for coming after me," Tabitha replied, "for being brave enough to say what you felt." After he was gone, Martha appeared with fresh linens for the bed. She helped Tabitha make it up, then sat down in the single chair while Tabitha began unpacking her trunk. "That is quite a man you have there," Martha said carefully. "I have known Russell Norton for 3 years now, and he is exactly what he appears to be. Steady, hardworking, honest. If he says he will do something, he does it." "You approve?" Tabitha asked. "I think you deserve happiness," Martha said. "And I think you have been alone long enough, even when Daniel was alive. Sometimes I would see you at church, sitting beside your husband, and you looked so lonely, dear, like you were in a room full of people and still completely by yourself." Tabitha's throat tightened. "It was like that sometimes." "Then let Russell change that," Martha said gently. "Let yourself be happy, even if it means people talk. Life is too short and too hard out here to waste it on caring what narrow minds think. Over the following days, Tabitha settled into a routine at the Whitley house. She helped Martha in the store during the mornings, learning the inventory and assisting customers. In the afternoons, she would sew, taking in mending work and starting to make herself a new dress, something in a soft gray that was not quite mourning but not yet the bright colors of a woman fully returned to society. Russell called on her every evening, precisely at 6 o'clock. Sometimes they would walk through town as the sun set, talking about their days, their pasts, their hopes for the future. Other times they would sit on the Whitley's front porch, Russell in one chair and Tabitha in another with a respectable distance between them, while Martha and her husband Albert sat nearby as informal chaperones. On Sunday, true to his word, Russell attended church. He arrived at the Whitley house early, dressed in a clean white shirt and dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing. Tabitha wore her black dress still, but she had added a white collar she had sewn herself, a small gesture toward the future. Walking into church together created exactly the stir Tabitha had expected. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the congregation, but Russell held his head high and offered Tabitha his arm with obvious pride, and she drew strength from his steadiness. They sat together in a pew, and when Reverend Patterson began his sermon about new beginnings and trusting in God's plan, Tabitha wondered if the man had heard the gossip and chosen his topic deliberately. After the service, several women approached. Some were kind, offering congratulations and support. Others were coolly polite, their disapproval evident in tight smiles and clipped words. Mrs. Henderson, who had been one of Daniel's mother's friends back east and had always made Tabitha feel inadequate, stopped directly in their path. "Mrs. Jenkins," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "What a surprise to see you still in Newton. I heard you had left for Denver." "I changed my mind," Tabitha said evenly. Mrs. Henderson's eyes flicked to Russell. "How fortunate that you had a reason to stay. Though I must say, it seems rather soon to be seen in company. Your husband has been gone such a short time." Tabitha felt Russell tense beside her, but before he could speak, she responded. "My husband has been gone 3 months, Mrs. Henderson. I loved Daniel, but he would not have wanted me to waste my life in prolonged mourning. He was a practical man who believed in moving forward. Still," Mrs. Henderson sniffed, "there are standards of decency." "And I am observing them," Tabitha said firmly. "Mr. Norton and I are courting properly, with appropriate chaperones and in full view of the community. If you have concerns about propriety, I suggest you direct them to Reverend Patterson, who has counseled us both on the appropriate conduct during courtship." This was not entirely true, as they had not specifically sought the Reverend's counsel, but the invocation of his name had the desired effect. Mrs. Henderson's mouth pinched, and she nodded curtly before moving away. "That was well done," Russell murmured as they continued toward the church doors. "You stood your ground without losing your temper." "I have had practice," Tabitha said. "Daniel's drinking was an open secret in this town. I learned to hold my head high despite the whispers." That afternoon, Russell took Tabitha and Martha out to his homestead in his wagon. The ride took about 40 minutes, the road winding south through rolling prairie dotted with early spring wildflowers. Tabitha watched the landscape pass, trying to imagine herself living here, away from the town and its constant activity. The homestead appeared as they crested a gentle rise. The house was exactly as Russell had described, a solid structure built from local lumber and stone, with a wide porch and a shingled roof. It sat on a slight elevation, with the land sloping down toward a creek bordered by cottonwood trees. Beyond the house stood a barn, a chicken coop, and several fenced pastures where cattle grazed. "It is beautiful," Tabitha said, and meant it. There was something appealing about the isolation, the sense of a place carved out of the wilderness through hard work and determination. Russell helped both women down from the wagon, and they spent the next hour exploring. The house interior was sparse but clean, with a main room that served as kitchen and parlor, a small bedroom, and a storage room that could be converted to another bedroom. Russell pointed out where he planned to add on, describing the layout of additional rooms with an architect's precision. "I thought here we could put a proper parlor," he said, gesturing to the south side of the house. "Big windows facing the creek, enough space for a good sofa and chairs. And then beyond that, 2 more bedrooms, maybe a small study." Tabitha walked through the space, letting herself imagine it. Curtains on the windows, rugs on the floors, her sewing machine in the corner of the parlor where the light was good. A garden outside the kitchen door, chickens scratching in their yard, the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. It was so different from anything she had imagined for herself back in Virginia, but standing here now, it felt possible. More than possible. It felt right. Martha wandered outside to look at the garden plot Russell had mentioned, giving Tabitha and Russell a few moments of relative privacy. They stood in what would be the parlor, separated by propriety but connected by something stronger. "What do you think?" Russell asked. "Can you see yourself here?" "I can," Tabitha said honestly. "But I need to know, Russell, what would my role be? Would I be simply your wife, keeping your house and cooking your meals? Or would I be your partner, involved in the decisions, helping to build this place?" "Partner," Russell said without hesitation. "I need someone who can think, who can help me plan, who can manage things when I am away with the cattle. My mother ran our farm in Missouri as much as my father did. She kept the books, decided when to sell eggs and when to save them for hatching, managed the money. That is what I want, Tabitha. Someone beside me, not behind me." "Then yes," Tabitha said, feeling certainty settle into her bones. "I can see myself here. I can see us building this together." Russell's face transformed with joy, and for a moment Tabitha thought he might forget propriety and embrace her. But he restrained himself, simply reaching out to squeeze her hand briefly before letting go. "How long?" he asked. "How long do you need before you will marry me?" Tabitha considered. The proper mourning period was a year, but she had already decided that waiting for society's approval was less important than following her own heart. 2 months, she said. "That will be 5 months since Daniel's death. Time enough for people to adjust to seeing us together, time enough for me to be certain of my own heart, though I think I already am." 2 months, Russell repeated, as if testing the weight of the words. "I can wait 2 months, but Tabitha, I want you to know I am already certain. I have been certain since the morning I watched you climb into that coach. My heart has been yours for longer than that, but that was the moment I could not deny it anymore." Martha returned then, full of enthusiasm for the garden plot and the creek and the whole beautiful spread of land. They stayed another hour, Russell showing them the barn and his tools, the small herd of cattle that represented his life's work so far. As the sun began to lower, he drove them back to Newton, and all the way Tabitha felt a bubbling excitement she had not experienced in years. The next 2 months unfolded with a dreamlike quality. Tabitha continued working in the Whitley store, and Russell continued his courtship with patient determination. He brought her small gifts, nothing expensive but thoughtful. A book of poetry he thought she would enjoy. A packet of seeds for her future garden. A length of blue calico fabric that matched her eyes, purchased carefully from a traveling merchant. They talked endlessly, learning each other's rhythms and quirks. Tabitha discovered that Russell was surprisingly well read. that he had opinions about politics and farming and the future of the Kansas Territory. Russell learned that Tabitha had a sharp wit when she was comfortable enough to show it, that she could make him laugh with her observations about human nature, that beneath her quiet exterior was a strength forged by disappointment and survival. They disagreed sometimes too. Small arguments about whether the government's policy toward the Indians was just or how best to manage a household budget. But these disagreements never escalated into the kind of bitter fights Tabitha had endured with Daniel. Instead, Russell would listen to her point of view, consider it seriously, and either adjust his thinking or explain his own reasoning with respect for her intelligence. 6 weeks into their courtship, Russell took Tabitha to a dance at the community hall. It was the first truly social event they had attended as a couple, and Tabitha wore her new gray dress, the one she had finished just that morning. Russell arrived in a suit borrowed from Albert Whitley, slightly too large in the shoulders but respectable. The hall was crowded with most of Newton's population, everyone from ranchers to railroad workers to shopkeepers. A fiddler and a guitar player provided music, and couples spun across the floor in various states of grace. Russell led Tabitha onto the floor for a waltz, one hand at her waist and the other holding hers, a respectable distance maintained between them. "I am not much of a dancer," he warned as they began to move. "You are doing fine," Tabitha assured him, following his lead. In truth, he was a bit stiff, counting the steps under his breath, but there was something endearing about his concentration, his determination to do this properly for her. As they danced, Tabitha was aware of eyes watching them, some friendly, some judgmental. But increasingly she found she did not care. Let them watch. Let them see that she had found something good after darkness, that she was choosing happiness over propriety. During a break in the music, Mrs. Patterson, the Reverend's wife, approached them with cups of punch. "Mr. Norton, Mrs. Jenkins, I am so glad to see you both here. You make a lovely couple." "Thank you, madam," Russell said, accepting the punch gratefully. "I hope you will not think me forward," Mrs. Patterson continued, "but my husband and I have been discussing your situation. If you are planning to marry soon, we would be honored to perform the ceremony at the church. No charge for the Reverend's services, of course." Tabitha felt warmth bloom in her chest. This was acceptance, public and genuine. "That is very kind of you, Mrs. Patterson. We have not set a precise date yet, but it would be within the next month." "Wonderful," Mrs. Patterson beamed. "Just let us know when and we will make sure the church is prepared. And Mrs. Jenkins, several of the ladies, myself included, would like to organize a small reception afterward if you would permit it. Nothing grand, just cake and coffee in the church hall, a chance to celebrate properly." "I would like that very much," Tabitha said, surprised to find tears in her eyes. After Mrs. Patterson moved away, Russell leaned close. "You are crying. Are you all right?" "I am happy," Tabitha said, wiping at her eyes. "I did not expect such kindness. After Mrs. Henderson and some of the others, I thought most people would disapprove." "Most people want to see others happy," Russell said. "And those who do not, well, their opinions do not matter much in the end." 2 weeks later, Tabitha woke with a sense of certainty that had been building for days. It was early May, wildflowers blooming across the prairie, the weather finally warm after a long winter. She had been in Newton for nearly 5 months since Daniel's death, and she had courted Russell for 7 weeks. By society's standards, it was still too soon. By her heart's measure, she had waited long enough. She found Russell at his usual time that evening, waiting on the Whitley porch to take her for their evening walk. But instead of walking through town, Tabitha led him toward the church, where Reverend Patterson was tending the small flower bed his wife had planted. "Reverend," Tabitha said, "do you have a few moments?" "Of course, Mrs. Jenkins. What can I do for you?" Tabitha looked at Russell, then back at the Reverend. "We would like to set a wedding date, 2 weeks from Saturday if the church is available." Russell's head snapped toward her, surprise and joy warring on his face. "Tabitha, are you certain? I do not want you to feel rushed." "I am not rushed," she said firmly. "I am ready, unless you have changed your mind." "God, no," Russell said, then flushed. "Sorry, Reverend, I mean no, I have not changed my mind, not at all." Reverend Patterson smiled. 2 weeks from Saturday it is. Shall we say 2 o'clock? That gives Mrs. Patterson and the ladies time to prepare the reception. Everything moved quickly after that. Martha threw herself into helping Tabitha prepare, altering one of her nicer dresses to serve as a wedding gown. It was pale blue, the color of a robin's egg, with white lace at the collar and cuffs. Not a traditional white wedding dress. But Tabitha had been married before, and she wanted something different this time, something that represented a new beginning rather than trying to replicate old traditions. Russell spent his days finishing the additions to the house, determined to have the new parlor and at least one additional bedroom completed before he brought Tabitha home as his wife. He hired 2 men from town to help with the carpentry, and they worked from dawn to dusk, the sound of hammering echoing across the prairie. The women of the church, led by Mrs. Patterson, planned the reception with enthusiasm. Even some of those who had been coolest toward Tabitha seemed to warm to the idea of a wedding, perhaps recognizing that resistance was futile, or perhaps genuinely happy to celebrate a union that had clearly brought joy to 2 deserving people. The night before the wedding, Tabitha could not sleep. She lay in her small room at the Whitley house, listening to the sounds of the town settling for the night, and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The frightened girl who had left Virginia with Daniel, chasing dreams that had never materialized. The lonely wife who had endured disappointment and financial ruin. The widow who had climbed into a stagecoach planning to leave it all behind. And now, the woman who was choosing her own future, who was marrying a man not because he promised her the moon, but because he offered her the earth, solid and real and true. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect May day that felt like a blessing. Martha helped Tabitha dress, pinning up her auburn hair and weaving in small white flowers that Russell had picked from his land the day before. "You look beautiful," Martha said, her eyes misting. "Like a young girl again with all that hope in your face." "I feel young," Tabitha admitted. "Younger than I did at 21 when I married Daniel." "Is that strange?" "Not at all," Martha said. "You are starting fresh, and that has a way of renewing a person." The church was surprisingly full when Tabitha arrived, leaning on Albert Whitley's arm since she had no father to walk her down the aisle. Russell stood at the front beside Reverend Patterson, wearing a new suit that he had purchased specially for the occasion, his hair neatly trimmed, his face shining with emotion as he watched her approach. Tabitha walked slowly, taking in the moment. The church pews filled with familiar faces, some she knew well and some she recognized only from passing in the street. The afternoon sun streaming through the windows, casting golden light across the worn wooden floors. The smell of the flowers arranged at the altar. And most of all, Russell's face, his green eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. When she reached the front, Albert placed her hand in Russell's and stepped back. Russell's fingers closed around hers, warm and steady. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Patterson began, and Tabitha felt the words wash over her, familiar and strange at once. She had stood here before with Daniel, had made these same vows, and yet everything was different now. She was different now. When it came time for the vows, Russell spoke clearly. his voice ringing through the church. "I, Russell Norton, take you, Tabitha Jenkins, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Tabitha repeated the words, meaning every syllable. "I, Tabitha Jenkins, take you, Russell Norton, to be my lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Russell slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, a ring he had commissioned from the jeweler in town, sized perfectly to fit her. Then Reverend Patterson pronounced them husband and wife, and Russell leaned down to kiss her, gentle and brief but full of promise. The congregation erupted in applause, and Tabitha and Russell walked back down the aisle together, hand in hand, Mr. and Mrs. Norton now. Outside the church, people lined up to offer congratulations, even Mrs. Henderson managed a tight smile and a brief good wish, and Tabitha accepted it with grace. The reception in the church hall was everything Tabitha could have wanted. There was cake, 3 layers high and covered in white frosting that Mrs. Patterson had stayed up late making. There was coffee and punch, and someone had even found a bottle of wine for toasting. Russell's hand never left Tabitha's, as if he was afraid she might disappear if he let go. As the afternoon stretched toward evening, Russell leaned close and whispered, "Are you ready to go home? Home." The words sent a thrill through Tabitha. Not the house she had shared with Daniel, not Martha's spare room, but a real home that would be theirs together. "Yes," she said, "I am ready." They said their goodbyes and climbed into Russell's wagon, Tabitha's trunk and belongings already loaded, along with gifts from the reception. As they drove out of Newton toward the homestead, the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "Are you nervous?" Russell asked as the house came into view. "A little," Tabitha admitted, "but more excited than nervous." Russell pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house. The new additions were complete, the fresh lumber still pale against the older structure. He climbed down, then reached up to help Tabitha. But instead of setting her on the ground, he lifted her into his arms. "Russell," she gasped, laughing. "Tradition," he said, grinning. "Got to carry you over the threshold." He managed the porch steps carefully, then pushed open the door with his shoulder. Inside, the house was transformed. Tabitha had expected the sparse furnishings she had seen before, but Russell had been busy. There was a new sofa in the parlor, upholstered in sturdy brown fabric. Curtains hung at the windows, simple but clean. A rug covered the main room floor, and the kitchen table had 4 matching chairs instead of the mismatched collection from before. Russell set Tabitha down carefully. "I wanted it to be ready for you," he said. "Martha helped me with the curtains and such. I am not much for decorating." "It is perfect," Tabitha said, walking through the rooms with wonder. The bedroom had a large brass bed with a new mattress, a wardrobe, and a washstand with a flowered pitcher and bowl. The second bedroom was set up as a guest room, with a smaller bed and a simple dresser. And the new parlor had the sofa, 2 chairs, a bookshelf already half filled with Russell's collection, and a small table by the window where light would be perfect for sewing. "There is more," Russell said, leading her outside. Behind the house, he had built a chicken coop and already stocked it with 6 laying hens. "For eggs," he explained. "And I thought you could sell them in town if you wanted, bring in some money of your own." "You thought of everything," Tabitha said, moved by his care. "I wanted you to feel at home here," Russell said. "This is your house as much as mine, Tabitha. I want you to change anything you want, add things, make it yours." Night fell as they brought in Tabitha's trunk and the gifts from the reception. Russell lit lamps throughout the house, filling it with warm, golden light. They made a simple supper together, Tabitha learning the layout of her new kitchen while Russell told her where everything was stored. After supper, they sat on the porch as full darkness came. The prairie stretched away in all directions, vast and quiet except for the wind through the grass and the distant yipping of coyotes. Above, stars emerged in impossible profusion, the Milky Way a bright river across the sky. "I used to find the silence out here unsettling," Russell said. "After growing up on a farm with 6 siblings, all that noise and activity, but I have come to love it, the peace of it." "I think I will love it too," Tabitha said. She leaned against him, feeling the warmth of his body beside hers, the strength of his arm as it came around her shoulders. "Thank you, Russell, for coming after me, for not letting me run away. Thank you for staying," he said, turning to kiss her forehead, "for taking a chance on me on us." They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, then Russell stood and offered his hand. "Come to bed, Mrs. Norton. We have a whole lifetime ahead of us, but it starts now." Tabitha took his hand and let him lead her inside to the bedroom, to the beginning of their life together. The nervousness she had felt earlier faded as Russell closed the door behind them, as he turned to her with such tenderness in his eyes that she felt cherished, precious. Their wedding night was everything a wedding night should be, tender and passionate, awkward in moments but ultimately right. Russell was patient and gentle, making sure Tabitha felt safe and loved. And when they finally lay together in the darkness, her head on his chest and his arms around her, Tabitha felt a peace she had never known before. "I love you," Russell whispered into her hair. "I should have said it before now during the ceremony, but I was so focused on getting through the vows without stumbling. But I do, Tabitha. I love you." "I love you too," Tabitha said, and realized it was true, had probably been true since the morning he stopped her stagecoach, maybe even before. "I love you, Russell Norton, and I am so grateful I stayed." The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both entirely new and deeply satisfying. Tabitha threw herself into making the house truly hers, unpacking her belongings and arranging them alongside Russell's. She hung her dresses in the wardrobe next to his shirts, placed her sewing basket in the parlor by the window, arranged her few books on the shelf beside his many. The garden plot Russell had prepared became her special project. She planted the seeds he had given her during their courtship, along with others she purchased in town. Carrots and beans, tomatoes and squash, lettuce and radishes. She created neat rows, staked and watered, checking them daily for signs of growth with an enthusiasm that made Russell smile. "You are going to have enough vegetables to feed the entire county," he teased one evening, watching her water the newly planted seeds. "Then we will sell the extra or preserve them for winter," Tabitha said practically. "I am not going to waste a thing." Russell worked dawn to dusk with the cattle and the land, but he always made time in the evening to sit with Tabitha, to talk about their days, to plan for the future. They discussed expanding the herd, building a larger barn, maybe hiring help when the cattle operation grew enough to justify it. "I am thinking we could start breeding horses too," Russell said one night over supper. "Good horses are always in demand, and I know decent bloodlines. Start small, see how it goes." "That sounds wise," Tabitha agreed. "Diversification, my father used to say, do not put all your eggs in one basket." "Speaking of eggs," Russell said with a grin, "your chickens are already earning their keep. 6 eggs today, that is more than enough for us." "I will save the extra to sell next time we go to town," Tabitha said. "Start building up a small fund." They went to town together once a week, Russell for supplies and Tabitha to visit Martha and sell her eggs and any preserves or baked goods she had made. These trips became social events, chances to see friends and maintain their place in the community. Tabitha always returned energized by the contact, then happy to retreat back to the peaceful isolation of the homestead. Summer arrived in earnest, bringing heat that shimmered across the prairie and storms that rolled in fast and fierce. Tabitha learned to read the sky, to recognize when a storm was coming, and help Russell secure everything that could blow away. She learned the rhythm of ranch life, the early mornings and the physical tiredness that came from real work. One evening in July, 3 months after their wedding, Tabitha was in the garden pulling weeds when she felt Russell come up behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," Tabitha said, leaning back against him. "I never knew life could be this good, Russell, this simple and this good." "It is not always going to be easy," he warned, though he was smiling. "Winter will test us. We will have disagreements, hard times, disappointments. But we will have each other," Tabitha said, turning in his arms to face him, "and that makes all the difference." She kissed him, there in the garden with the evening sun warm on their faces, and felt grateful beyond measure for the morning she had climbed into that stagecoach, for the cowboy who had ridden after her, for the courage to stay and take a chance on love. That night, as they lay in bed, Russell propped himself up on one elbow to look at her. "I have been thinking," he said carefully, "about children." Tabitha's heart jumped. It was a subject they had not discussed much since that first conversation over breakfast months ago. "What about them?" "I know you said you might not be able to have them," Russell continued. "And I meant what I said about it not mattering. But I have been wondering, with Daniel, did you try?" Tabitha blushed, grateful for the darkness hiding her face. "I do not know if we tried hard enough. Daniel was often away, and when he was home, he was often drunk. We were only together in that way a handful of times in 2 years. Then maybe you did not have a fair chance," Russell said gently. "With us, well, we have been together as man and wife for 3 months now, quite regularly." He cleared his throat, suddenly shy. "I just wanted you to know if it happens I would be overjoyed, and if it does not, I am still just as happy." "I would like children with you," Tabitha admitted. "I am trying not to hope too much, but I would like them." "Then we will leave it in God's hands," Russell said, kissing her softly. "Whatever happens, we are blessed already." August came, hot and dry, testing the garden and the cattle's water sources. Russell worked long hours ensuring the cattle had access to the creek, moving them to different pastures, checking on their health. Tabitha worked alongside him when she could, learning to ride well enough to help herd the cattle, surprising herself with capabilities she had never known she possessed. One afternoon, as they were moving a group of cattle to a new pasture, a calf got separated from its mother and panicked, running toward a steep embankment. Without thinking, Tabitha urged her horse forward, cutting off the calf's path and turning it back toward the herd. The maneuver worked perfectly, and when she looked up, Russell was watching her with unmistakable pride. "You are a natural," he called out. "I am learning from the best," she called back, grinning. That evening, exhausted and dusty, they washed up together in the creek, the cool water a blessing after the heat of the day. They splashed and laughed like children, and Tabitha felt young in a way she never had even when she was actually young. This was what happiness felt like, she realized. Not the absence of difficulty, but the presence of someone to face it with, someone who made even hard work feel like joy. In September, Tabitha woke one morning feeling queasy. She dismissed it at first, thinking perhaps she had eaten something that disagreed with her. But when the nausea continued for 3 days, along with an unusual tiredness, she began to wonder. She said nothing to Russell yet, afraid to hope, afraid to disappoint him if she was wrong. But when a week passed and then two, and her monthly courses did not come, she could no longer deny the possibility. She was in the garden, sitting on a bench Russell had built for her when she finally let herself believe it. A baby. She was carrying Russell's child. She told him that evening after supper, her hands shaking as she placed his palm against her still flat belly. "I think we are going to have a baby." Russell went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Are you certain?" "Not completely, but fairly certain. All the signs are there." For a moment he said nothing, and Tabitha felt a flash of worry. Then he swept her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe, his face buried in her hair. When he finally pulled back, there were tears on his face. "A baby," he said wonderingly. "Tabitha, we are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" she asked, though she could see that he was. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Russell said. "I am blessed. We are blessed." He knelt down, pressing his ear to her belly. "Hello in there, this is your father. I want you to know you are already so loved." Tabitha laughed, running her fingers through his hair. "I am not sure the baby can hear you yet." "Does not matter," Russell said, looking up at her with wonder in his eyes. "I will tell him every day anyway, or her, I do not care which." They told Martha and Albert the next time they went to town, and the older woman cried with happiness. Word spread quickly through Newton, and the community that had been skeptical of their quick courtship now embraced them fully. A baby was a sign of commitment, of building a future, of contributing to the growth of the town and territory. Mrs. Patterson organized the church women to make baby clothes, and packages began arriving at the homestead. Small gowns and blankets, knitted booties and soft hats. Russell started working on a cradle in the evenings, carefully sanding each piece of wood until it was smooth as silk. As fall turned to winter, Tabitha's belly grew. She felt the baby move for the first time in November, a flutter like butterfly wings inside her. She grabbed Russell's hand and placed it where she felt the movement, and when he felt it too, his face transformed with awe. "That is our child," he said softly. "Living and growing inside you. It is a miracle, Tabitha." Winter came hard that year, with snow that piled high and temperatures that dropped below zero. But inside their house, warmth and love abounded. Russell rarely left Tabitha's side, anxious about her health, constantly asking if she needed anything, if she felt all right, if the baby was moving enough. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Tabitha finally said, exasperated but touched by his concern. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. But none of them were you," Russell said simply. "None of them were carrying my child." On a frigid February night, Tabitha felt the first pains. They had arranged for Martha to come stay when the time came, and Russell rode through the darkness to fetch her and the midwife, Mrs. Donovan, an experienced woman who had delivered dozens of babies in the county. The labor was long and difficult. Tabitha had heard stories of childbirth, but nothing quite prepared her for the reality of it, the waves of pain that came stronger and closer together, the exhausting work of bringing a new life into the world. Russell stayed beside her the whole time, letting her squeeze his hand until his bones creaked, wiping her face with cool cloths, murmuring encouragement. "You can do this," he said over and over. "You are the strongest person I know, just a little longer." Finally, as dawn broke on a February morning in 1879, Tabitha gave one last tremendous push, and their baby entered the world with a loud, healthy cry. Mrs. Donovan worked quickly and then placed the baby, cleaned and wrapped in a soft blanket, into Tabitha's arms. "You have a son," she said, smiling. "A beautiful, healthy boy." Tabitha looked down at the tiny face, the impossibly small fingers, the dark hair plastered to his head. Her son. Their son. She felt Russell beside her, his arm around her shoulders, his face wet with tears as he looked at the baby. "He is perfect," Russell whispered. "Tabitha, he is absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Tabitha asked, unable to look away from the baby's face. "James," Russell said. "After my grandfather, if you like it. James Russell Norton." "James," Tabitha repeated, testing it. "I love it." "Hello, James. Welcome to the world." The baby's eyes opened briefly, unfocused but searching, and Tabitha felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. All the pain, all the difficulty, all the uncertainty of the past year faded in the face of this tiny miracle. After Mrs. Donovan and Martha had cleaned up and left them alone, Russell lay beside Tabitha on the bed, the three of them together. James had fallen asleep, his small chest rising and falling with steady breaths. "Thank you," Russell said softly, "for this gift, for our son, for choosing to stay that day instead of leaving on the stage-coach." "Thank you for coming after me," Tabitha replied, equally soft. "For being brave enough to say what you felt, for giving me a reason to stay." They lay together in the peaceful aftermath, watching their son sleep, and Tabitha thought back to that morning barely a year ago when she had been climbing into the stagecoach with her black morning dress and her one small valise, planning to leave Newton forever. How different her life had become. How much better than anything she could have imagined. The months that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and exhausted days, of learning to care for a newborn while maintaining the ranch. But even in her tiredness, Tabitha felt a deep contentment. Russell was an attentive father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with James when he cried, marveling at every small development. By spring, James was smiling and starting to babble. Tabitha resumed her garden work with James in a basket beside her, and Russell built a small pen on the porch where the baby could play safely while they worked. Life on the homestead had expanded to include this new little person, and somehow everything rearranged itself to make room. 1 year after their wedding, Russell took Tabitha into town for their anniversary. Martha watched James for the afternoon, and Russell and Tabitha had dinner at the restaurant where they had shared that first breakfast, the morning he had stopped the stagecoach. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Norton," Russell said, raising his coffee cup in a toast. "Happy anniversary, Mr. Norton," Tabitha replied, smiling. "It has been quite a year." "The best year of my life," Russell said. "Well, except for the part where I nearly lost you before I even had you. That part was terrifying." "I was terrified too," Tabitha admitted. "Standing in that road listening to you tell me you loved me, I was absolutely terrified. What if I made the wrong choice? What if it was a mistake?" "And now?" Russell asked. "Now I know it was the best decision I ever made," Tabitha said. "The only decision that mattered." After dinner, they walked through Newton as the sun set, hand in hand. They passed the spot where the stagecoach had stood that morning, where Russell had climbed down from his horse and asked her to stay. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if I had stayed on that coach," Tabitha mused. "If I had gone to Denver and never seen you again." "Do not," Russell said, pulling her close. "Do not even wonder. We are here now together with our son. That is all that matters." As the years passed, life on the Norton homestead continued to flourish. James grew from a baby into a toddler, taking his first steps in the parlor Russell had built, saying "Papa" and "Mama" with increasing clarity. The ranch prospered too. Russell's careful management and hard work paid off, the cattle herd growing to nearly 200 head as he had planned. They added horses to their operation, and Russell's eye for good breeding stock proved sound. The horses sold well, bringing in additional income that they saved carefully. Tabitha expanded her garden, and her preserves and vegetables became sought after in Newton. She also started taking in sewing work again, creating beautiful dresses and shirts that showed her skill. Between the ranch, the eggs, the garden, and her sewing, she contributed significantly to their household income, and Russell made sure she knew her work was valued. When James was 2, Tabitha became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. In early 1881, she gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth Norton. Russell was equally smitten with his daughter as he had been with his son, and Tabitha loved watching her strong cowboy husband cradle the tiny girl with such tenderness. 2 children, Russell said one evening, holding Grace while James played at his feet. 2 beautiful, healthy children. I feel like the richest man in Kansas. We are rich, Tabitha agreed, sitting beside him. Not in money, though we are doing well enough, but in all the ways that matter. By 1882, the Norton homestead was well established. The house had been expanded again to include another bedroom and a larger kitchen. The barn was big and sturdy, housing not just cattle but the growing horse breeding operation. The fences were all in good repair, the garden was productive, and the land was yielding its bounty year after year. Russell hired 2 ranch hands, young men who lived in a bunkhouse he built near the barn. With their help, he was able to expand operations further, taking on a contract to supply beef to the railroad camps that were still spreading across Kansas. Tabitha had helped too. A young woman named Sarah from town came 3 days a week to help with the children and the household work, freeing Tabitha to focus on her sewing business, which had grown beyond anything she had imagined. She now had regular customers in Newton, and even some from surrounding towns, women who would travel to the Norton homestead for fittings or send measurements by mail. One autumn evening in 1883, 5 years after their marriage, Tabitha and Russell sat on their porch as they did most evenings, watching the sun set over the prairie. James, now 4, was playing with his toy horses in the yard. Grace, too, was asleep inside. The cattle were lowing in the distance, and smoke rose from the bunkhouse chimney where the ranch hands were finishing their supper. "You ever think about that morning?" Tabitha asked. "When you stopped the stagecoach?" "All the time," Russell admitted. "I think about how close I came to letting you go, to not following my heart. It was the bravest thing I ever did, and the most terrifying." "I think about how close I came to leaving," Tabitha said, "to running away instead of facing the possibility of something new, something good." Russell reached for her hand, lacing their fingers together. "We have built something beautiful here, Tabitha, not just the ranch but our life together, our family. I look around and I see everything I ever dreamed of and more." "I never dreamed this," Tabitha said honestly. "When I was young, I dreamed of a comfortable life of security and respect. But this, what we have, is so much more than that. This is joy, Russell, real, deep joy." "You are my joy," Russell said, turning to look at her. "You and our children, this land, this work we do together. I wake up grateful every morning that you stayed." "I wake up grateful every morning that you asked me to," Tabitha replied. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, James ran up to the porch. "Papa, tell me the story about when you stopped Mama from leaving." It had become his favorite story, the tale of how his parents met and fell in love. Russell laughed and pulled the boy onto his lap. "Well," he began, "it was a beautiful morning in May, and your mama was on a stagecoach planning to leave Newton forever." Tabitha listened to Russell tell the story, embellishing it slightly as he always did, making it more dramatic for their son's entertainment. But the core truth remained. A widow leaving town, a cowboy who rode after her, A love story that began on a dusty road and grew into something neither of them could have anticipated. As darkness fell and stars began to emerge, they moved inside to put James to bed. Grace woke and needed feeding. The evening chores needed doing. The dishes needed washing. The fire needed banking for the night. All the ordinary tasks of an ordinary life, made extraordinary by love and partnership, and the deep satisfaction of building something together. Later, lying in bed with Russell's arms around her, Tabitha thought about the girl she had been on that stagecoach, mourning and afraid and certain her life was over at 24. She wished she could go back and tell that girl what waited for her if she would just stay, just take a chance, just trust that sometimes the best things come from the most unexpected places. But that was the nature of life, she supposed. You could not know the future. You could only make the best choice you could in each moment and trust that love would see you through. "What are you thinking?" Russell murmured sleepily. "That I love you," Tabitha said simply. "That I am grateful for every day we have together. That I would choose this 1,000 times over." "Only 1,000," Russell teased. "1,000,000 times," Tabitha amended, smiling in the darkness. "For eternity." "For eternity," Russell agreed, kissing her softly. "My Tabitha, my love." They drifted to sleep in each other's arms, and outside their window, the Kansas prairie stretched away under an endless canopy of stars, the same stars that had witnessed a cowboy riding hard after a stagecoach, determined to stop the widow who was leaving town forever, determined to ask her to stay, determined to offer her his heart and his future and all the love he possessed. And she had stayed. That was the miracle of it, Tabitha thought as sleep claimed her. She had stayed, and in staying, she had found not just a home but a place to belong, not just a husband but a partner, not just a life but a love story for the ages. The story of how a cowboy and a widow built a ranch on the Kansas prairie, raised a family, and loved each other through all the seasons of their lives, from that perfect May morning when everything changed, to all the uncounted days that stretched ahead of them, golden with promise and bright with hope. The years continued to unfold with their mixture of joy and challenge. The ranch faced difficulties, as all ranches did. There was the year of drought when the creek nearly dried up and Russell had to drive the cattle 15 miles to water every day. There was the winter when a blizzard killed a dozen head of cattle, and Russell spent 3 days searching for the survivors. There was the year when James was 6 and nearly died from fever, and Tabitha and Russell took turns sitting by his bedside, praying desperately for him to recover. But through every challenge, they faced it together. When times were hard, they did not turn on each other but instead drew closer, finding strength in their partnership. And when times were good, they celebrated together, grateful for the blessings and knowing they had been earned through hard work and perseverance. In 1885, when James was 6 and Grace was 4, Tabitha discovered she was pregnant once more. This time, she was older, 31, and the pregnancy was harder on her body. She tired easily and had to cut back on some of her activities. Russell hired additional help so she could rest, and Martha came to stay for the last month before the birth. On a warm July evening, Tabitha gave birth to their third child, another boy they named Daniel after Tabitha's first husband. It was Russell's idea, offered with the generosity that characterized him. "He was part of your life," Russell said when he suggested the name. "He brought you to Kansas, and without that, we never would have met. I can honor that." Little Daniel was a content baby, easier than either of his siblings had been. He nursed well, slept in long stretches, and rarely cried. James and Grace adored him, their baby brother, and would sit for hours just watching him sleep or playing gently with his tiny fingers. By 1887, The Norton family was well established in the community. Russell served on the town council, helping make decisions about Newton's future. Tabitha was active in the church, teaching Sunday school and organizing charity drives for families in need. Their children attended the one-room schoolhouse in town, riding in with their father when he went for supplies. The ranch had grown to nearly 500 acres. Russell had bought adjacent land as it became available, always with Tabitha's input and agreement. They ran a successful cattle and horse operation that employed 6 ranch hands year-round and more during busy seasons. Tabitha's sewing business had evolved into a small dress shop in town, run by a young woman Tabitha had trained, with Tabitha designing the pieces and overseeing the work. Financially, they were comfortable. Not wealthy by Eastern standards, but solid and secure in a way that gave them peace. They had money saved, investments made wisely, and a thriving operation that supported not just their family but provided employment for others. But more than the material success, they had built something intangible and infinitely more valuable. They had built a love that deepened with each passing year, that weathered difficulties and celebrated joys, that was rooted in respect and watered with affection. Their children grew up watching their parents work together as true partners, seeing a model of marriage that was equitable and loving. On their 10th wedding anniversary in 1888, Russell surprised Tabitha with a trip to Denver, the city she had been heading to that fateful morning. They left the children with Martha and Albert, now considered part of the family, and took the train west. Denver was bigger and more bustling than Newton, full of theaters and restaurants and hotels that seemed impossibly grand. Russell had booked them a room at the finest hotel, and for 3 days they were not ranchers or parents but simply a man and woman in love, exploring a new city together. On their last evening, they sat in the hotel restaurant over a meal that neither of them had to cook, looking out at the lights of the city spreading below them. "You ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had come here?" Russell asked. "If you had stayed on that stagecoach?" Tabitha considered the question seriously. "I suppose I would have worked in my cousin's dress shop, maybe eventually started my own business. I might have done well. Denver is growing, lots of opportunities for a skilled seamstress." "Would you have been happy?" Russell asked. "Maybe," Tabitha said honestly. "I am resourceful enough that I probably would have built a decent life, but it would have been a smaller life, Russell, safer perhaps, but smaller. I would have never known what it felt like to be truly part of something, to build a home and a family, to work beside someone who valued me as an equal. I would have never known love like what we have." Russell reached across the table for her hand. "I asked you to stay that morning, but the truth is, you saved me too. I was building that homestead, working towards some future I could not quite picture. And then you came into my life, and suddenly everything made sense. You gave me purpose beyond just surviving or succeeding. You gave me something to build toward, someone to share it all with." "We saved each other," Tabitha said softly. "That is what love does, I think. It rescues us from smaller versions of ourselves and helps us become who we were meant to be." They stayed up late that night, talking in their hotel room about everything and nothing, remembering the early days of their courtship, laughing over mistakes and mishaps, marveling at how far they had come. And when they finally slept, it was with the contentment of 2 people who knew beyond doubt that they were exactly where they belonged. Returning to the ranch after their anniversary trip felt like coming home in the deepest sense. The children ran to greet them, full of stories about their adventures with Martha and Albert. The ranch hands had kept everything running smoothly. The garden had been watered, the animals tended, the daily work completed without them. Life resumed its familiar rhythm, But Tabitha carried the memory of that trip with her, a reminder that even in the midst of daily responsibilities and routine, the romance and love that had brought them together remained strong. The years rolled on. James grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch work and showed every sign of wanting to take over the operation one day. Grace revealed a talent for working with the horses, training them with a patience and sensitivity that even Russell admired. Young Daniel was still finding his way, but he showed signs of being the scholar of the family, always with a book in hand when chores were done. In 1892, when Tabitha was 38 and Russell was 44, they found themselves grandparents when James, now 18, married his sweetheart Emily and had their first child within the year. Holding her grandson for the first time, Tabitha felt the circle of life complete itself in a profound way. "We are getting old," she said to Russell that evening, rocking the baby while James and Emily rested. "We are getting blessed," Russell corrected, watching her with the baby. Every year brings something new to be grateful for. By 1895, 17 years after that morning on the road outside Newton, the Norton family had become one of the most respected in the county. Russell and Tabitha were seen as pillars of the community, examples of hard work and strong values. Their children were well raised and well regarded. Their ranch was prosperous and provided employment and stability for many families. But on a quiet evening in late summer, with the children grown and pursuing their own paths, with the ranch running smoothly under James's increasing involvement, Tabitha and Russell found themselves where they had been so many times before, sitting on their porch watching the sunset. "Do you remember what you said to me that morning?" Tabitha asked. "When you stopped the stagecoach." "Which part?" Russell said, smiling. "I said a lot of things. I was desperate. You said stay, not for what was, but for what could be." Tabitha quoted. "Those words have stayed with me all these years. They were not about changing my past or escaping it, but about being open to the future." "And what a future it has been," Russell said, pulling her close. "Better than anything I imagined when I spoke those words." "We built something good here," Tabitha said, looking out over the land they had worked together, the home they had created, the family they had raised. "Something that will outlast us." "We built it together," Russell emphasized. "That is what matters. Not just what we built, but that we did it side by side." As the sun set and the stars began to emerge, Tabitha reflected on the long journey from that morning when she had been preparing to leave Newton forever, certain that her life held nothing but disappointment and struggle. How wrong she had been! How grateful she was to have been wrong! That cowboy who had ridden after her stagecoach, who had been brave enough to declare his love in the middle of a public road, who had asked her to stay and build a future with him, had given her everything she had never known she wanted. Not just security or comfort, but partnership and respect and genuine, enduring love. "Thank you," Tabitha said, turning to Russell, "for coming after me, for not letting me run away from the best thing that ever happened to me." "Thank you for staying," Russell replied as he had so many times before, "for taking a chance on a simple cowboy with big dreams and a homestead." "You were never simple," Tabitha said, smiling. "And you gave me so much more than a homestead. You gave me a home." They sat together as full darkness fell, comfortable in silence, hands joined after 17 years of marriage and partnership. Inside the house, the life they had built together waited: photographs on the walls, books on the shelves, furniture worn smooth by years of use, every object telling a story of their shared life. The ranch spread around them, peaceful in the evening quiet. In the distance, cattle moved slowly through the pastures. In the barn, horses settled for the night. In the bunkhouse, the ranch hands finished their evening meal. And overhead, the The same stars that had witnessed the beginning of their story continued their eternal journey across the Kansas sky. Tabitha thought about that widow who had been leaving town forever, about the woman who had been so certain her life was over, who had seen no future beyond escape and starting over somewhere far away. She thought about the courage it had taken to stay, to trust in something uncertain, to believe in the possibility of love after loss. And she thought about the years since, the life that had unfolded like a flower opening to the sun, full and rich and beautiful in ways that young widow could never have imagined. The children raised, the ranch built, the love that had grown deeper and stronger with each passing season. The challenges faced and overcome, the joys celebrated, the ordinary moments that accumulated into an extraordinary life. "I would do it all again," Tabitha said softly. "Every moment, every choice, everything exactly the same. Even the hard parts," Russell asked. "Especially the hard parts," Tabitha said, "because they taught us who we are, what we are capable of, and they made the good times even sweeter." Russell kissed her temple, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Here is to the years ahead," he said. "To growing old together, to watching our grandchildren grow, to whatever adventures still await us." "To us," Tabitha agreed. "To the widow and the cowboy who built a love story on the Kansas prairie." As they sat together on their porch, surrounded by everything they had created, Tabitha felt a deep peace settle into her bones. This was what happiness looked like, she thought. Not a single moment of perfect bliss, but a life built day by day, choice by choice, with someone who truly saw you and loved you anyway. Someone who rode after stagecoaches and stopped them in the middle of dusty roads because losing you was unthinkable. The future stretched ahead of them, unknown but no longer frightening because whatever came, they would face it together. Just as they had for 17 years, just as they would for however many years God granted them. Hand in hand, heart to heart, building their life one day at a time, grateful beyond measure for the morning when everything changed, when a cowboy asked a widow to stay, and she found the courage to say yes. And as the last light faded from the western sky and the stars burned bright overhead, Tabitha Norton, formerly Tabitha Jenkins, formerly a woman with no hope and no future, sat beside her husband in perfect contentment, knowing that the best choice she had ever made was the one she made that May morning in 1878, standing beside a stopped stagecoach on the road outside Newton, Kansas, when she chose to stay and see what could be.